In August 1991, hardline communists deposed Gorbachev in an attempt to put a stop to his reform agenda and restore power to the Communist Party. Iconic footage that was to be broadcast worldwide shows Yeltsin standing on a tank outside the Russian Parliament building, known as the White House, to defy the coup. Yeltsin had placed his bets correctly. His stance against the hardliners was successful, and Gorbachev was returned to power. But the situation continued to unravel as the republics that comprised the Soviet Union strove for independence and the people yearned for change. On December 25, 1991, Gorbachev resigned. The following day, the USSR was voted out of existence. A superpower was dead. Yeltsin was now in a position of unparalleled power. The engineer from Siberia and once disciple of Lenin was now the ruler of a new nation, the Russian Federation. Yeltsin was the darling of the West, and in particular the United States, once the USSR's implacable enemy, whose vision was for Russia to become a capitalist and fully democratic country. The burden of expectation was immense.
I think he was much more of a destroyer than a builder. As far as building a new Russia is concerned, he lived through an extremely difficult time, the time of the transition, the time when the people were frustrated and confused, when the country was in a state of an economic crisis bordering on collapse.
At the behest of the West, Yeltsin undertook radical economic reform, known as shock therapy. Items only previously dreamed of were now available on the streets of Moscow for those who could afford them. But for many others, the immediate results of the reforms were disastrous. Savings were wiped out as inflation rose to over 2,000%. Many went hungry as price subsidies on foodstuffs were removed. But in times of crisis, Yeltsin's style seemed closer to that of his communist predecessors than his Western backers.
The reforms in Russia were Bolshevik reforms. They were only named as a market, democratic, or whatever. But in their substance, it were very radical. And Bolshevik means that there were the reforms which were saying, ends justify the means. Goal is justifying the ways to reach this goal. If we need to build a market economy and 2/3 of population would be in poverty and they would die from diseases or whatever, we don't care. We need market economy, that's it. It's all the same we have when the communism was on the way.
As the economic crisis intensified and amid growing popular discontent, Yeltsin's grip on power weakened. He faced increasing opposition, and in 1993, the supposed Democrat dissolved parliament. MPs staged a coup, refusing to leave the White House. After 10 days, President Yeltsin ordered tanks to assault the building. He was now attacking the seat of Russian democracy, the same building he had defended just 2 years earlier. The symbolism and what it implied, that the Democrat had become the dictator, was not lost on the Russian public.
The scene of tanks shelling the parliament is something that is deeply ingrained in people's minds here in Russia, and that was the moment when he dealt a blow to his own popularity, and some of his ardent supporters were totally disillusioned in him and came to hate him for that.
Alexander Korsakov, Yeltsin's bodyguard, had appeared side by side with him in the first coup attempt of August 1991. But the pair later fell out, and Korsakov published a controversial book about the president.
Он далеко не был демократом. Как только он добился полной власти,
Yeltsin was no real Democrat. As soon as he got complete power, his base side appeared. He became a tyrant. He became someone who would never listen to the other opinion.
The country went from crisis to crisis under Yeltsin's rule. For some, this was bad luck. the inevitable results of a traumatic transition from communism to capitalism. For others, it was plain incompetence. Whatever the reason, the 90s were a dark decade for many Russians.
In '92, the inflation in Russia was 2,600%. In '93, the tanks were shooting the White House. In '94, the war in Chechnya started. In '95, criminal privatization. In '96, manipulations on the presidential elections. In '97, financial pyramid. It was a robbery. In '98, collapse of the financial pyramid. In '99, explosions of the houses, a new war. This is a real history. These were the events which were really accompanying Yeltsin's presidency.
President Yeltsin, once known for his energy and robustness, became increasingly frail. The pressure of power was affecting his health and self-esteem.
He suffered a lot throughout his tenure and tormented himself probably more than his harshest critics. I think it was terribly painful to him that he lost people's love, that people came to hate him, and he knew it. He knew by the time he was stepping down that his popularity was almost negligible, was only a few percentage points.
Лучше он застрелился и повесился.
Yeltsin tried to commit suicide during his presidency on several occasions. He tried to shoot himself, cut his veins. He even attempted to fall on scissors. He was quite psychotic at times.
Yeltsin became a figure of fun in the international media. The president became infamous for his eccentric public behavior, fueled, it is claimed, by an increasing dependence on alcohol.
Alcohol was the cause of the friction in our relationship. People said I accustomed him to drink, but it's the other way round. By the end of his life, he was certainly an alcoholic. His family didn't help. After surgery, his wife Nina smuggled in a bottle of vodka under her dress. The doctors caught her and said, "What are you doing? Do you want to finish him off?"
Once a campaigner against privilege and a man of the people, as president, Yeltsin gained an appetite for the trappings of power.
No one ever dreamed of the privileges he enjoyed. Neither Stalin nor Khrushchev, Brezhnev or Gorbachev. He ordered a special plane. You need to wait for a while for a specially designed aircraft, but Yeltsin said, "I need it immediately." Well, we had to take it to Switzerland to have a new interior designed, based on sketches of his favorite artist.
Yet for his old friends from Sverdlovsk, he remained the down-to-earth man he'd always been. Even as president, Yeltsin kept faithful to his promise to holiday with his university contemporaries every 5 years. These home videos, taken on one of these trips, show a kind man worn down by the pressures of power.
When he became president, he behaved just as he used to. I met him in Moscow and addressed him in the formal way as Boris Nikolaevich. He was angry and said, "What are you saying? Call me Boris."
Yeltsin was praised, even by his political enemies, for playing fairly, or relatively so in comparison with Russian tradition.
In this country, if you are overthrown, people will at once crush you so that you can never rise again. Yeltsin changed this culture. For the first time, if he dismissed someone he didn't agree with, he would not try to finish them off. For example, with Korsakov, his bodyguard, when he was told about the book, he said, "I don't want to read it, but let Korsakov get on with his life and work."
In that sense, he was a very noble man, I would say. Noble man, very open. And he understood a lot, much more than many people could imagine. Simply, he had no idea how to operate with this completely new environment. country was moving too fast forward, and he had no idea what to do with all this.
Yeltsin left office of his own accord on December the 31st, 1999, the first Russian leader to do so. After handing power to Vladimir Putin, Yeltsin largely withdrew from public life, suffering continued ill health. He had presided over a chaotic decade, at the end of which the aspirations of most Russians for a better life were still unfulfilled. Boris Nikolaevich Yeltsin died of heart failure on April the 23rd, 2007, aged 76.
Today he remains largely unappreciated by his fellow countrymen. His main achievement, in my view, ridding Russia of communism, destroying the communist dictatorship, is something that is remains basically unnoticed by the Russian people.
Following his death, Russians pondered how to commemorate a man at first loved, but later reviled. This museum in central Moscow held a competition to design a monument to the late Russian leader. The variety of designs attests to how controversial Yeltsin remains.
My sculpture is called Instability. In Yeltsin's time, all of us felt this instability, as if everything could crumble and go down at any time. But I also wanted to show how difficult it was to be president in that situation.
But the winning design, voted by the public, is this model by artist Dmitry Kavargi.
The sculpture shows the chaos that followed the breakup of the Soviet Union. Today, this is what Yeltsin is most strongly associated with in people's minds.